Hi, Misha here, and it's time to take this finish of Valmet. Yes, it's not Valmet, it's Valmet. Out to the range. And apologies if the audio isn't perfect. We're still waiting on the adapter for the new camera, but it shouldn't be unlistenable. But yeah, this is the M78 that we kind of talked about in a previous video, which is the LMG version, obviously. This is in 308 762 by 51 NATO, which most in the US are. One thing I like about the 308 ones, they have the machined receiver, the milled, not the stamped. Seems like most of the 223 and the 76239s you find are the stamped versions, and I like this milled. These are just so smooth. And for a military trigger, so nice. And I think it's just really very much Valmet's attention to detail that even the carry handle is spring loaded. And just a very high-end type gun. And here we have the 20-round mag. Where's my other one? These are kind of interesting. There's a few different types. One annoying part about the 308 Valmets, there are a few different magazine patterns. One that's kind of the M76, one that's the M78. You can read about it. It's a whole thing. But for these M78 types, you either find mags like these, which are actually Valmet converted Swedish AK-4 mags, so basically converted G3 types, which is neat because they'll have kind of date codes and things on them. I think this is 0681 dated, which seems to be pretty common. It gives you an idea when they were done. There are also Finnish made Valmet mags for these, but I like these better because they are converted from military mags, and they have a phosphate finish that matches the receiver very well. For whatever reason, the Valmet factory mags are blued. I don't know why. So I just think these kind of go with the gun better. Move it out of the way for a sec. And speaking of converted mags, I also have this big boy. This is a converted G3 mag done here in the USA by MPC, maximum capacity, some products or something like that. Anyway, and it's essentially two 20 rounders joined together to be a 30. It's kind of funny because you can find HK mags of this 30 round pattern too. And these seem to be of pretty good quality. And again, they have a phosphate finish that well matches. I only have one of these just for fun. But I do have 3 of the 20 rounders that are essentially factory conversions. And also have a bayonet. The leather hide type, the puka. And these are quite neat. Because why would you not want a bayonet for the light machine gun, correct? Quite a point on these and pretty respectable edge even at that. And this is your typical Finnish sling. I don't have the clip on the end, but it fits fine without it. Typical buttstock and what have you. And the previous owner said he had never fired this. And looking internally, it may have never been fired outside of test firing by either the factory or the importer. And that's just not right. So let's rectify that. Let's fire at least the first shots through this in a couple of decades, and then we'll come back to the table. Valmet.
We'll probably hear you talking about shooting it, and then it'll just cut off.
So the history behind the M78 is quite interesting. I've talked about it again in previous videos, but it's really something I felt like shooting today. It is a very smooth, very slick gun. The mags come out very easily. And they fit very tight, but just lock in like butter. Very little side to side and very little front to back delay. And that's just kind of how this gun is. The safety is smooth but tight. Has an extended shelf here. Likewise, the mag release, the paddle is extended. Anyone who's familiar with the Galil knows it. But yeah, the M62, the semi-auto version of the RK62, was standard issue and is standard issue today. But this sighting system with the front sight way out here, part of the prong with the flip night sight here. And then we have more of a traditional AK gas block here. Of course, it has the lug for the bipod and a gas tube. And then we have a sliding notch rear. That kind of comes from the M71, which is essentially a failed Valmet. They were trying to make a cheaper, lighter, more traditional gun that very much resembled the AKM, but they went too cheap and light. The Finnish military did try them out. After that, they went back to the drawing board, and they would come out for the standard infantry rifle with the M76 series, which is pretty much a return to the M62, but with a reinforced stamped receiver. Although late in M76 production, they would go to this slab-sided machine receiver in the 80s too. But there were efforts to make a light machine gun. The previous Finnish light machine gun did less than great. Was it the KVV or the VKEK? Anyway, 62. It has kind of a dubious reputation. The FDF itself would work on a project known as the Model 1974, the M74, also known as the Cavalry Light Machine Gun. And it would introduce kind of a similar sighting system to this, a bipod, a clubfoot stock, but Valmet internally would be working on what would be the M78 here. So they were pretty similar in concept, but execution was a little different, and they were independent projects. And Valmet would offer the M78 to the FDF, but in the end they would not really adopt it. Interestingly, this being a 308, there are tales that could be apocryphal that some of the FDF soldiers saw that Valmet was making 308 for export and really wanted a 7.62 NATO gun for themselves versus the 7.62x39. One reason Finland never went to 5.45 or 5.56, they felt that the smaller diameter cartridge would not perform well in the Arctic environment and in the heavily forested north of the country. So they just kind of stuck with what works. But yeah, these would be imported from the late 70s through the mid 80s. You'd have a few different companies that brought over Valmets, including Valmet Inc. itself. You had Inner Arms, you had Stoger, I believe, and there are some that came in with like import marks that no one knows for sure who brought those over and how they came in. How many Valmets are in the country? No one knows. I know people always ask. You see numbers like, oh, there's 150 of this style, there's 50 of this style. The thing is, those numbers are more traditional. They're not really backed up by anything. The truth is, no one really knows how many semi-autos are in the USA. The Finnish military said a few years back they had about 350,000 Valmets in inventory, meaning that obviously Valmet produced more than that. And when I say Valmet, these are also made by Seiko for the military, but for export, they were Valmets. Now, Valmet would sell off its firearms division. It still exists as a company today. But they would sell off their firearms division around 1987 to 88, depending on which source you look into. Many of the assets would go to Seiko, who would continue production, and ultimately developing what would become the M92S for a civilian semi-auto, and the RK95 TP for the military. But unfortunately, the M92S came out after the 1989 executive order import ban on assault rifles, so we don't have any here. And even for the military, they only made about 20,000 RK95 TPs. So very small production run. And then quite sadly, around 1999, Seiko 2 would end its own military firearms division, meaning today that Finland doesn't really have capacity to make AK-type guns for its own military. Luckily, it does have quite a few RK62s in stock, which it's been modernizing as the RK62M and a few different patterns. I think there's an M1, M2, M3. They also have RK62 76s, which is a stamped receiver, but those are mostly just kept in reserve. And also in reserve, they have 100,000 DDR East German MPI KM and KMS guns, so fixed and folding stock, and about 100,000 Chinese Type 56 2s, which are Bakelite folders. So they do have a good stockpile of guns. But eventually they'll have to figure out something. But considering most of them are not kept in active service, they're just stuck back, they just kind of lean heavily on the original RK62. But yeah, I just, you know me and my thing for RPKs, and I had one of these in the past. And so when the chance came to pick up another one, I just couldn't say no. And this one's in great shape for what it is. Some of these, especially in the other calibers, have the synthetic handguard. I like the wood. There is kind of a foil type heat shield inside. Interestingly, the barrels on Valmets are not chrome lined. They are hammer forged, but they're not chrome lined. That's just a thing. Even with the newer guns, like the 95, they're not. And a few people pointed out in previous videos, this angle cut on the receiver looks kind of odd, like maybe it was a converted sporter. But all the Valmets in the country here are pre-89, so that's not it. And if you look on the underside, make sure my sling's out of the way, you can see where the receiver comes all the way back. So this kind of just overlaps here. No one knows exactly why they did it like that, but it's been suggested it was for strength to reinforce the wood stock, and that makes perfect sense. This thing swivels inletted in the stock. And another odd feature of the fixed stock Valmets, we have this plastic butt plate. No trapdoor, not metal, and these are very much known for cracking and breaking, as are the plastic stocks found on the M82 bullpup and the plastic stocks on the M71 and even some of the M76s. Whatever polymer Valmet used has not held up. Oddly enough, these also use Phillips head screws, not standard flathead. Very odd for a military gun. So Valmets are very well made, and many call them the Cadillac of AKs, and I'm not going to disagree. But they're not perfect. They really are not. They have some oddities like the non-chrome line barrel. They have a nice finish, but it's still just a phosphated finish. And they have plastic parts that are known for not holding up. And also the magazines can be problematic. And if you get into the stamped receiver guns like the M71, sometimes the mags and or the receiver aren't the toughest known to man. But they are definitely in the collectible market today, because no more will probably ever come in, since Finland's no longer making them at all. And they did a very thoughtful job. Like I said, we have the spring-loaded handle. Also, you notice this bipod does not rattle. It is solid as can be, but also very easy to deploy. You just squeeze it in and pull it down. The other thing I would ding it, it would be nice if maybe it were adjustable so we could use the longer mags, but yeah, it's not really designed for competition type shooting. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this kind of revisit. If you own a Valmet, we'd love to talk about them below. I'm sorry I can't really answer questions about import numbers or things like that. We just don't know. And people have tried for years on places like Valmet.org to get information, and the importers are all gone and they just haven't released records, and what do you do? But always fun to talk about neat, rare pre-bang guns for us. So, hope so too. As always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help support the channel, please check out the link to our Patreon page. This is Misha, and we'll catch you very soon. Next time.